Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. In the name of Allah, the most merciful and the most beneficent. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. I am Abdul Ghaffar Bhatti, Assistant Professor of English at University of Education, Lahore, Multan campus. I again welcome to all of you in the course of American literature. I hope that by now you would have gone through the works of Eugene O'Neill, Ernest Hemingway, and Robert Frost. Eugene O'Neill's drama Long Day's Journey into Night, in which you would have studied the story of the addicted Tyrone family. And similarly, Ernest Hemingway's novel The Sun Also Rises, in which you would have seen how Hemingway has portrayed the picture of the last generation. And then you would have gone through the poetry of Robert Frost, who defines poetry. A poem begins with delight and ends with wisdom. So you would have definitely read a lot. But as far as these three writers, Ernest Hemingway, Eugene O'Neill, and Robert Frost are concerned, they are somewhat modern writers. The writer today we are going to talk about is Ralph Waldo Emerson. He is one of the pioneer writers of America. And he is not only one of the pioneer writers of America, rather he has left indelible impression on his successors. So today we are going to talk about Ralph Waldo Emerson. Dear students, as I have already told you that today we are going to talk about Ralph Waldo Emerson. Interestingly, Ralph Waldo Emerson was not a popular literary figure of his period. And he was not well-read and well-known literary person during his lifetime. However, the later generations discovered new meanings and new implications in his essays and in his poetry, and they started admiring and appreciating Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it was later on that Ralph Waldo Emerson became popular literary figure of American literature. Today we are going to talk about Emerson's essays, Nature. And in this essay today, I am going to talk about chapter number 2, and the title of this chapter is Commodity. Commodity means anything which helps you, anything which you need, anything which helps you to sustain and survive, anything which can be bought and sold in the market. So from this point of view, sugar, flour, and things like these, they fall under the categories of commodities of life. So whenever we use the term commodities of life, by this we mean things like these. So it is in this term, in this context, Emerson has described nature as a commodity. Ralph Waldo Emerson was born in 1803 and he died in 1882. Throughout his life, he had been suffering from tuberculosis, but despite his disease, which had been permanently with him, he has created great works of literature. Ralph Waldo Emerson is an essayist, a poet, and a philosopher. His main recognition are his essays and his contribution to the discipline of philosophy. In the discipline of philosophy, he has contributed to transcendentalism, Emerson was ordained pastor of the Church of Boston in 1829. Soon after his master degree. But later on, he resigned from this post because he was dissatisfied with the prevalent practices of Christianity. It does not mean that he was not a Christian. He was a Christian and a true Christian. But he was dissatisfied with the beliefs which were prevalent in the society of the period. I'll be talking about this point in coming slides. Emerson was deeply influenced when he read John Stuart Mill, Samuel Taylor Coleridge, William Wordsworth, and Thomas Carlyle. All these writers have played great role in shaping the personality of Emerson. Particularly, he was influenced by romantic writers, romantic poets, Samuel Taylor Coleridge and William Wordsworth. And when we start reading his essay, Nature, in this we see that there is lot of affinity, lot of close affinity in the ideas of Ralph Waldo Emerson and the ideas which have been given by Coleridge and William Wordsworth in their poetry. And similarly, like Mill and Thomas Carlyle, he is a great American prose writer. So we are going to discuss Ralph Waldo Emerson in detail. Emerson had a religious sense of mission. Although many people accused him of subverting Christianity, going against Christianity because of his radical views, but the case is otherwise. He explained in his work that for him to be a good minister, it was necessary to leave the church. The address he delivered in 1838 at his alma mater, the Harvard Divinity School, made him unwelcome at Harvard for 30 years. And because of this address, he was banned, totally banned for 30 years to visit or to enter his alma mater. In this address, Emerson accused the church of acting as if God were dead and of emphasizing dogma while stifling the spirit. Basically, in this address, Emerson accused that church was not working for the spiritual rebirth and regeneration of people. Rather, it was deadening the spirit. It was not showing the path to the glory, to the permanent glory. It was not guiding the people properly, and because of this, he was criticized by the people of his time. But later on, the people of the coming generations came to understand the implications and the meanings of his words, and they started admiring and appreciating Ralph Waldo Emerson. Usually, Emerson's philosophy is considered contradictory, and it is true to some extent that he consciously avoided building a logical intellectual system because such a rational system would have negated his romantic belief in intuition and flexibility. In his essay, Self-Reliance, Emerson remarks, "A foolish consistency is the hobgoblin of little minds." Yet, he is remarkably consistent in his call for the birth of American individualism inspired by nature. Ralph Waldo Emerson is aphoristic in his essays. He is as aphoristic in his essays as French essayist Montaigne was, and as Sir Francis Bacon is aphoristic in his essays. When we start reading his essays, we see that spiritual vision and practical aphoristic expression make Emerson exhilarating experience, make Emerson exhilarating. It is because of these two qualities, because of his spiritual vision and because of his aphoristic quality, we start enjoying his essays. There is beauty and flow in his essays. One of the transcendentalists has aptly compared listening to Emerson with going to heaven in a swing. Much of his spiritual insight comes from his readings in Eastern religion. Particularly, Emerson had great interest in Hinduism, Confucianism, and Islamic Sufism. And when we read his poetry and his essays and even his contribution to the discipline of philosophy, we see that the influence of these three religions, Hinduism, Confucianism, and Islamic Sufism, is prominent, is evident in his works. Emerson has been much appreciated by other writers. The British critic and poet Matthew Arnold has said that the most important writings in English in 19th century had been Wordsworth's poems and Emerson's essays. Emerson prose has poetic quality. He is a great prose poet. As a poet, as a philosopher, and as a essayist, Emerson has influenced a long line of American poets, including Walt Whitman, Emily Dickinson, Edwin Arlington Robinson, Wallace Stevens, Hart Crane, and Robert Frost. Emerson is also credited with influencing the philosophies of John Dewey, George Santayana, Friedrich Nietzsche, and William James. Besides Hinduism, Confucianism, and Islamic Sufism, three other factors have also influenced Emerson's work very much. And it is because of these influences Emerson has contributed a lot as far as the discipline of philosophy is concerned, particularly the school of transcendentalism is concerned. These three currents or these three factors are new Platonism, belief in an ideal state of existence, British Romanticism with its emphasis on individualism, and the writings of Emanuel Swedenborg. In other words, the three factors are, let me again summarize. Number one, New Platonism. Number two, British Romanticism. And number three, the writings of Swedenborg. From New Platonism came the belief in the primacy of intellectual thinking over material reality, an idea which was basically presented by the Greek philosopher Plato. Through a series of dramatic dialogues, Plato, in his work Republic, argues that there are ideal forms existing in an absolute reality. In the material world in which we live, All objects and phenomena are imperfect representation of these ideals. Simply speaking, by this, Plato meant that this world is twice or thrice removed from reality. It is an illusion of illusion. Our entire lives are spent trying to perfect ourselves and our environment in hopes of attaining an ideal existence. Agreeing with Plato, the new Platonic philosophers like Ralph Waldo Emerson and his fellow transcendentalist Amos Bronson Alcott go so far as to say that ideas are the only reality. The tangible world exists solely as a manifestation of pure ideas. This preoccupation with pure ideas also appears in the writings of the German philosophers Immanuel Kant, who was first to use the term transcendentalism. Transcendentalism, simply speaking, it stresses the role of divinity in nature and the individual's intuition and exalted feeling over reason. Transcendentalists think that reality can be approached or reality can be known through one's intuition and one's insight. Immanuel Kant's philosophical investigation of the pure workings of the mind were extremely influential throughout Western culture during the 18th and 19th centuries, especially as they pertain to American transcendentalism. Kant believes that transcendental knowledge is limited because as humans we can understand only what we are capable of perceiving. If we cannot perceive something, it simply does not exist. Other German transcendentalists, with whom Emerson is closer in his thinking, expanded Kant's reasoning. They argue that simply because we cannot perceive something does not mean that it does not exist. Emerson maintains that the soul exists, but he admits that he cannot define what this soul is, other than acknowledging when he senses it in himself or in another person. Second factor that influenced Ralph Waldo Emerson and his writing is British Romanticism. Basically, I am explaining these factors because if we do not know what were the conditions and circumstances which helped to develop the personality of Ralph Waldo Emerson as a poet, as an essayist, and as a philosopher, we will be unable to understand his works. That is why I am talking about these factors. So the second factor that influenced Ralph Waldo Emerson, that is British Romanticism. Particularly the British Romantic poets Wordsworth, William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge, they influenced Emerson a lot. Romantic writers such as William Wordsworth and Samuel Taylor Coleridge have advocated the primacy of the individual over the community and fostered a belief in the authenticity of individual vision over the conventions and formalities of institutions. For romantics and transcendentalists alike, all institutions, be they religious, social, political or economic, are suspect as being false, materialistic and deadening to an individual's pure insight. So they rebel against rebel against all the institutions, and this is the case with Wordsworth, with Coleridge, particularly with Shelley in his poetry. Both movements, British Romanticism and Transcendentalism, emphasize personal insight or intuition as a privileged form of knowledge. Such fierce adherence adherence to individuality that is a mainstay in Emerson's writing influenced the progressive social movement of the mid-19th century. Individuality came to be recognized as a God-given right, a belief that holds as true today as it did during Emerson's life. So what Emerson learned from British Romanticism was the authenticity and the importance and the significance of individuality and man's intuition and man's insight. Another strong influence on Emerson's expression of transcendentalism and his work is the writing of Swedish mystic philosopher Emanuel Swedenborg. Emerson was heavily influenced by Swedenborg's belief in the absolute unity of God, not the Trinity, like other Christians, and in our personal responsibility for our salvation. Emerson expresses strong distrust and criticism of the restrictions and shallowness of conventional society. This is what I have already explained, that how he delivered a lecture in his alma mater, and because of that lecture he was banned to enter or visit his own alma mater for 30 years. Basically, he was talking about this aspect, that how church is not working for the spiritual rebirth and regeneration of society. Emerson is very much influenced by Swedenborg, but he advocates an ecstatic, visionary approach to life and to knowledge. Many of Emerson's essays express admiration for Swedenborg and acknowledge the influence that Swedenborg had on his own thinking. The major emphasis of American transcendentalism is transcendence, which involves reaching beyond what can be expressed in words or understood in logical or rational thinking to seek the genesis of our existence. I have already explained this idea that as far as transcendentalism is concerned, transcendentalists believe that they can get at reality, they can know reality, they can know knowledge with intuition, with insight. By gaining a new understanding, human beings can attain a heightened awareness of the world and our rightful place in it. Emerson refers to this all-encompassing force that he credits for the mystery of our existence by various terms. Somewhere in his essays he calls it God, somewhere he calls it the universal being, and somewhere else he has described it as the oversoul. Emerson closely identifies nature with this force. According to Emerson, there is a close relationship between nature on one side and God, the universal being or the oversoul, on the other side. He goes to the extent that he thinks that his philosophy should be judged from pantheistic point of view rather than theistic point of view. That is, God coexists with nature, mean nature and God are one and the same thing. They share similar powers rather than being a power beyond it. According to transcendentalists like Emerson, a person who follows intuition and remains faithful to personal vision will become a more moral, idealistic individual. For many of Emerson's contemporaries, including Henry David Thoreau and Amos Bronson Alcott, such a course of action may result in an idealism that forms the basis for their actions especially actions that undertook to critique and change what was perceived as evil in society. For example, Henry David Thoreau went to jail rather than pay taxes to support America's involvement in the Mexican War. Transcendentalists also provide one major philosophical foundation for the abolition of slavery. However, while individuals such as Emerson combine transcendentalism with spirituality, the essentially pantheistic nature of the theory paved the way for more materialistic and exploitative expression. The doctrine of self-reliance mutated from an expression of moral integrity to a simple assertion of self-promotion and selfishness. As far as Emerson's form of transcendentalism is concerned, it is spiritual transcendentalism, or we can say that transcendentalism is combined with spirituality, which is a new type of transcendentalism which we study in Emerson's poetry, essays, and in his philosophical views. Another thing which is very important with reference to Emerson and his literary works, that is his religious beliefs. One of the greatest problems that readers of Emerson have is grasping his religious beliefs. We know that religion is important to Emerson because every essay seems saturated with references to attaining a more perfect relationship with God. His emphasis on a universal soul flowing through individual soul can strike us as mystical and abstract and therefore hard to grasp. The key to understanding Emerson's religious views lies in Unitarianism. Unitarianism means God is one being. God is supreme being. Not surprisingly, given Emerson's belief in the sanctity of individualism and his accepting Unitarian principles, this domination is based fundamentally on an individual's private relationship with God, the God within each of us, and on the individual's personal judgment in matters of morals and ethics. Unitarianism denies that the God of Christianity can be identified as the three-person Trinity, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. It was because of his such views, because of his Unitarianism, that I have already mentioned that Emerson was banned for 30 years to visit his own alma mater. Unitarians consider Christ to be of great importance, but not divine. Rather, they believe that Christ had a divine mission to make human beings more aware of God's goodness and of our obligation to care for each other. Hence, they are not Trinitarian, but Unitarian. As I have already said, that Unitarian means a person who believes God is one being, the supreme being. The emphasis of this movement lies not so much with a discussion of God's existence, but with the religiousness of human beings, and especially with our ethical natures. The Unitarian doctrine had wide-ranging implications for students and religious seekers in Emerson's time. The movement became more than a curiosity in late 18th century England and in the New England of the young American Republic. Suddenly, the basic Calvinist ideas still lingering in 1836 New England of humanity's helpless dependence on God's grace was superseded by the transcendentalist doctrine of the God within each individual. The followers of this belief prospered strongly enough in New England that Unitarianism became an independent denomination. Emerson's, as I have already said, is a poet, a transcendental philosopher, but besides a poet and a transcendental philosopher, Emerson is a great essayist as well. And he is an essayist par excellence. According to Matthew Arnold, as Wordsworth poetry is, in my judgment, the most important work done in our language during the present century, so Emerson's essays are, I think, the most important work done in prose. Emerson's essays from thematic point of view can be divided into three categories. Number one, descriptions of the universe and its laws. And under this category, Emerson has written such essays as self-reliance, compensation, spiritual laws, the oversoul, circles, experience, nature, and nominalist and realist. In second category, Emerson has essays which deal with the analysis of the moral faculties in human relationship in general. And in this category, he has talked about such human faculties like love, prudence, heroism, character, and manners. Third type of Emerson's essays are, they deal with studies of more morally particular problems of experience, and in this category he has talked about things like history, art, the poet, politics, New England, and reformers. Dear students, before starting Emerson's essay Nature, I have explained in detail that what were the factors and who were the writers that influenced Ralph Waldo Emerson and developed his personality as a poet, as an essayist, and a philosopher. As far as Emerson's essay Nature is concerned, it contains his major ideas, that is the need for a new national vision, the use of a personal experience, the notion of the cosmic oversoul, and the doctrine of compensation. All these things have been given in detail in his essay in Nature. As the essay opens, we see that right in the beginning, Ralph Waldo Emerson is making a plea. And the plea is, our age is retrospective. It builds the sculptures of the fathers. It writes biographies, histories, criticism. The foregoing generations beheld God and nature face to face. We through their eyes. Why should not we also enjoy an original relation to the universe? Why should not we have a poetry of insight and not of tradition, and a religion by a revelation to us and not the history of theirs? The sun shines today also. There is more wool and flax in the fields. There are new lands, new men, new thoughts. Let us demand our own works and laws and worship. Basically, in this essay, Emerson is asking his readers to have a face to face, have one to one, have direct contact with nature. And it is because of this direct, this unmediated contact with nature, we can understand the mysteries of nature, we can understand the secrets of nature, and even we can understand and discover our own selves as well. In coming years, we see that it was Walt Whitman who understood the message of Emerson properly, and he has expanded and elaborated all these things in his epic Leaves of Grass, and particularly in the section Song of Myself. Emerson's essay Nature was published in 1836. It was his first major work, and it continues to be his best known, because it is in this essay we find Emerson's main views, the views which he has elaborated in some of other essays and in his poetry. In 1836, Emerson joined the Transcendental Club, and he became an active transcendentalist philosopher along with Henry David Thoreau, Margaret Fuller, and Alcott. I have already explained what transcendentalism is, but over here I am telling you that Emerson was one of the active member of the Transcendental School, one of the active member of Transcendental Club. As far as this essay is concerned, it is a long essay, and it is divided into an introduction, and it has 8 chapters. All the chapters have titles. Emerson, as I have already told you, that he was deeply influenced by British Romanticism and particularly the movement of Transcendentalism, and both these, the influence of both these movements is very much prominent in his essay on nature. Most of the ideas and values of Transcendentalism, which Emerson has introduced in his literary works along with this essay on nature, they basically represent Emerson's in-depth study of philosophy, religion, and literature. Emerson's essay Nature was published with 2 different epigraphs. Epigraph means something which is given in the start of a poem or start of a work, and it has thematic link with the original work. It is taken, epigraph is basically a borrowed material from some other's writer, but it has thematic link with the original work. So Emerson's essay Nature had 2 different epigraphs. The essay's epigraph varied according to the edition, to different editions. In the 1836 edition, for example, Emerson introduced the essay with a quotation from the Romantic philosopher Plotinus. But when he reprinted the essay in 1849, he omitted Plotinus' poetic lines and inserted one of his own poems. Some of today's literary anthologies don't include either epigraph, others include both. However, as far as the 1836 epigraph from Plotinus is concerned, it is, nature is but an image or imitation of wisdom, the last thing of the soul, nature being a thing which doth only do but not know. This poetic line basically emphasizes a theme that runs throughout the essay. And the theme is nature does not have a personality of its own. Nature has no feelings and emotions. When we say, for instance, that nature is upset because a storm is violently raging outside, we are actually projecting our own human emotions onto nature that it itself does not possess. As far as 1849 edition of the essay Nature is concerned, it opens with a 6-line poem which was written by Emerson himself. And the poem is, "A subtle chain of countless rings, the next unto the farthest brings. The eye reads omens where it goes, and speaks all languages the rose. And striving to be man, the worm mounts through all the spires of form. Nature, in the images of a rose and a worm, speaks directly to individuals. In other words, there is communication between nature and human beings. Within these 6 lines, Emerson introduces various themes which are evident in the essay, including the theme of the chain that binds together all of nature, that nature and human beings, they are one and the same in the scheme of things. Often referred to as the great chain of being, this concept outlines the theory of evolution, another theme of Emerson that would shock the world when Darwin published his Origin of Species in 1859. Now the use of the word worm in Emerson poem strives to become a perfect form. It becomes a human being. Emerson states that our energy and excitement in creating something new has been lost because we try to understand the world around us by using only theories and histories about nature rather than personally observing it. So what Emerson, through both epigraphs, epigraph of Plotinus and epigraph of his own poem, is that Emerson asks his readers again and again to have one-to-one, to have direct contact, direct and unmediated contact with nature. And how we can achieve this? One solution to this problem involves our casting off impersonal theories or descriptions that distance us from nature and ourselves. Afterwards, we can re-examine the actual thing that we are a part of, namely nature. Direct experience with nature is best because it provides better insight into the contemporary world than does the historian's teachings or the scientist's theories. In order to help us focus more clearly on nature, Emerson distinguishes nature from art. Art, he says, is natural objects or materials that we alter for our own purposes. So anything, for example, roads, ships, bridges, homes, the blessings of electricity, the blessings of gas, all these things, they fall under the category of art. In this chapter, Emerson describes nature as commodity, and this is the concept which almost all people have in their minds. They think that nature is like other commodities, and commodity means a physical necessity. I have already explained that the things which can be bought and sold in the market, from the market, they fall under the commodities. So nature for human beings is like a commodity. It's like a physical necessity. As commodity, nature provides and takes care for the health and well-being of all people. Human beings, they only know this aspect of nature. For them, nature is a commodity, and it is in this concept they understand it. The only use of nature, as he says in this chapter, that the only use of nature which all men apprehend, they only know this aspect of nature. They do not know other aspects of nature which Emerson thinks are very important and which all people must know. Using this definition, Emerson discusses briefly how nature supports our earthly existence. That nature gives us warmth through sunshine, nature causes the ripening of fruit, so on and so forth. As he says in this chapter, that more servants wait on man than he will take notice of. So people or human beings take nature only as a commodity. They think that it is helping them to sustain and survive. It is helping them in making their life in making their life enjoyable and making their life luxurious, but they are unable to understand the other aspects of nature. This is what Wordsworth has also mentioned in one of his poems, "Getting and spending, the world is too much with us. Little we hear that is in nature." The same complaint Emerson is making over here in this chapter. Emerson explains that how different elements of nature, ranging from resources like metals, plants, and animals, to the basic elements of earth, air, fire, and water, all these elements nourish earth's inhabitants. Human beings use these elements for their survival, e.g., for the sake of heat. For example, for the sake of heat, shelter, water, and food. Nature's job is only to serve and benefit man. As he says in this chapter, beasts, fire, water, stones, and corn serve him. The field is at once his floor, his workyard, his playground, his garden, and his bed. After all this, the question which comes in our mind, whether human beings are returning to nature in the same way as nature is imparting to human beings. When we start seeking the answer of this question, whether human beings are returning to nature in the same way as nature is imparting or nature is serving and benefiting to human beings, the answer of this question is definitely no. And that is why Emerson laments that we don't perceive nature as it should be. We look at different things with similar eye. We usually ignore the beauty of nature which is around us. Thus, there is a need of different approach towards nature. Emerson says that man tries to control nature just for his own benefit, exploits nature to make it more useful for mankind. But Emerson has even found a positive approach to this instead of lamenting the situation, when he says that by harnessing nature, man is actually creating an art, a creative art, which enables man to stick with the process of integration. If man has been if man has succeeded in changing this earth into this planet into an earthly paradise, it is because of man's exploitative aspects of nature that man has been succeeded in changing this world into an earthly paradise, and this earth has become livable and enjoyable for human beings, for us all. In this essay, Nature, particularly in chapter number 2, Emerson hints at the process of man's evolution. He says that there is an obvious relationship between humanity and nature. Different elements such as plants, animals, sun, rain, and air, they are servants of human beings, and they work together to better the earth and mankind. For example, he says, as he says in the essay, the wind sows the seed, the sun evaporates the sea, the wind blows the vapor to the field, the ice on the other side of the planet condenses rain on this, the rain feeds the plant feeds the animal, and thus the endless circulations of the divine charity nourish man. As I have already said, basically in these lines, Emerson is talking about the theory of evolution and how all elements are servants of human beings, and it is because of these elements of nature man has changed this earth, this planet, into an earthly paradise. The essay's theme of progress based on the theory of evolution is one of the key idea which has been given by Emerson in this chapter. All the elements which are basically the servants of human beings, they work together to better and serve mankind. But man takes nature for granted and nature as a commodity. Nature has helped man to progress and to make his life easier. Nature has done all this not only to help man, but so that man may work for it. Again, this leads us to the same question which I have already raised, whether man is returning in the same way to nature as nature is imparting or giving to man. The central idea of chapter number 2 is that the most substantial relationship between nature and mankind is that nature is useful and beneficial to mankind in all its forms. All the elements of nature are basically serving mankind. Man should be thankful and grateful to nature for all this and give respect to it, because nature is sacred, nature is holy, nature is mother, nature is a creative force, nature is friend of human beings. As Emerson says, man is related to all nature. At the end of my lecture, dear students, I am going to summarize, recap what we have discussed in detail in this chapter number 2, and particularly in this essay, Nature. Emerson in this essay exhibits an untraditional appreciation of nature. Concerned initially with the stars and the world around us, the grandeur of nature, Emerson then turns his attention onto how we perceive the objects of nature. nature seeks to show humanity a new form of enlightening the human spirit and urges the formation of a strong link between man and the universal spirit. Emerson sees nature as an inspiration for people to grasp a deeper understanding of the spiritual world. He begins his essay by observing the omnipresence of nature, which garners respect from the observer. However, nature always seems distant, indifferent. Emerson then puts forth the idea that not everyone can observe nature, that one must have the capacity to appreciate, to feel awe and wonder like a child would, who does not try to understand but only appreciates it. He personifies nature as a woman by giving it human emotions and actions, such as nature never wears a mean appearance. And on another occasion, Emerson says that the wisest man could never lose curiosity by finding out all her perfection. The experience with nature that Emerson describes in this essay is truly sublime, magical, and yet indescribably beautiful. Using stars as symbols of the universe, Emerson states that we take stars for granted. Rather, we take the whole nature for granted because they are always present in our lives. They are so common. They are easily available. That is why we don't give any importance to them. No matter where we live, these things are familiar. These things are common to us. That is why we don't attach any significance to all these things. Then Emerson moves on from commenting on the faraway stars and begins to discuss the immediate landscape around us. He creates a bond between the stars and the landscape, furthering the theme of a chain linking everything in the universe. Emerson then makes a chain that the person who is most likely to see the whole of nature is the poet, distinguishing the poet from other people. He says that poets can see nature plainly, not superficially, as many people do. Instead of using theories of the past, Emerson emphasizes that there is a need to be discarded. The person who yearns to see must reveal their inner child, accepting nature as it is rather than attempting to manipulate it into something it is not. He emphasizes that there is no need to perceive nature from the theories of the past, from the books of science. Rather, there is need to develop a direct and unmediated contact with nature. Emerson's reference to the universal being, which he identifies with God, is what is now identified as transcendentalism. Every object in nature requires an animating life force through which Emerson believes that they are linked. It is because of his transcendentalism he thinks that nature, human beings, God, we all are linked with each other. Emerson claims that he is nothing, but he sees all. He concludes his essay on nature by stating that nature does not have a personality, that it alone devises. Humans give nature the human characteristics we perceive it to have. In the other sections of the essay, Emerson relates the idea of nature as an instructor to man and how man can be closer to him. He refers to nature's beauty as the qualities of nature that have medicinal and restorative powers for humans. Nature like a nurse, nature like a mother can have positive effects, and it can help man to come out of the state of depression, state of tension, and if man is happy, it can double man's happiness. So over here we see that there is close affinity between William Wordsworth and Emerson. The special beauty of nature has a strong ability to relieve the stress and anxiety that many humans suffer from. Emerson points out that a person who passively loses himself in the landscape will be rewarded by nature's regenerative powers, whereas a person who consciously seeks out such healing will be tricked by nature's illusions. In Emerson's, according to Emerson's views, the relationship between nature and language is also close. He draws the comparison between words and the objects they represent in nature, and that these objects signify spiritual realities and nature symbolizes spirituality. Emerson illustrates nature as the interpreter between people, supplying the language that people use to communicate with. Once again, we see that there is close affinity between Wordsworth and Emerson. Wordsworth says the same thing in his preface to the lyrical ballads, where he says that those people who live in the lap of nature, who live close to nature, their language is natural. The theme of universal understanding is emphasized by Emerson when he claims that each individual shares a universal soul linking that person to all others. Emerson claims that the relationship between the mind and matter is not fancied by some poets, but stands in the will of God, and so is free to be known by all men. The world will become an open book from which all can read. Emerson then goes on to tackle the difficult question of subjective truth and the impossibility of verifying the truth of external reality. The average person does not want to know what he thinks is real might be an illusion. However, whether or not nature exists as something distinct remains definitively unanswerable. After analyzing nature, one can see Ralph Waldo Emerson has a distinct, undeniable love for nature and the sublime. Emerson believes that all enlightenment of human nature, that all knowledge, that the relationship between God and humans transcends through nature. Also, all the ills and evils in the world may be traceable to this lapsing away from close attention to spiritual truths that comes from nature. Emerson theorizes that each person is a microcosm, a small universe corresponding to the macrocosm of the natural world. His great complaint is that we gain a limited knowledge of nature because we too readily mistake understanding for reason. Nature is the inspiration through which humanity begins to understand, not reason with the natural world. So his main stance is that there is a need to understand nature, because by understanding nature we can understand everything that is within us and outside us. Dear students, at the end of my lecture, I would like to suggest some books which can be very helpful for you people. One work which can be very useful for you people, this is Mignon, Charles W. and H. Rose Cliff Notes, which are available on net. You can easily browse net and you can find them. And the other work is Wayne, Critical Companion to Ralph Waldo Emerson. And next is Emerson Essay, Self-Reliance and Other Essays, published by Courier Corporation. Next book which can be very useful for you people is Ralph Waldo Emerson, American Essayist and Poets, Essays on Representative Man. And last but not least, the book which can be very helpful for you people is edited by Harold Bloom, and its name is Ralph Waldo Emerson. This book consists many critical essays which can help you to understand Ralph Waldo Emerson, a man, a poet, an essayist, and a philosopher. At the end of my essay, I would like to say thanks a lot for your patience. I would just like to quote the lines of Robert Frost from his poem Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, which you have definitely read in your syllabus, and that is, the woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. These lines have great inspirational effect. What Frost is saying over here is that as far as great people are concerned, or successful people are concerned, they are those who skip over the temptations because they have a rendezvous with destiny. So nothing can no obstacle, no hindrance can stop them to achieve success, and ultimately they get success. So wish you best of luck. Allah Hafiz.